Okay, everybody that's on, just for your awareness, I did turn on the YouTube stream now, so the meeting's being live streamed. Just for your awareness, and so I don't forget to do it in 2 minutes when the meeting actually starts. So. All right, Colleen, do you want to find the slides and kind of load that up? I think we're getting most people here. All right. Let's see. Great. All right. Well, it's 10 o'clock, so I think we should go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to talk about today, and we want to make sure we don't hold you guys any longer than we need to. We appreciate everybody being here. Welcome to the first of 6 cross-sector workshops of the Climate Initiatives Task Force. We are going to be, I'm going to be working on this meeting today with Colleen McHugh from the Water Institute of the Gulf, who's waving right there. She's going to be doing most of the facilitating today. And it's just really good to have everybody on this. So I'm going to do a few context slides. Colleen, if you could go to the next one. This isn't a formal working group of the task force. This is a workshop. So we don't have to do minutes of our last meeting. There was no last meeting. We don't have to do a roll call and all those kinds of things. But we do have an agenda to kind of keep us on track so that you guys can understand what we're here to talk about today and kind of keep us moving along. So we're going to have, if you go back one, Colleen, just real quick, just to kind of let people know what we're going to do. So we are going to start with introductions. So you all, because everybody's on a different group primarily through the task force process. So we'll let you guys introduce yourselves to one another. Then we're going to have a few slides just to kind of set the theme of the workshop. And today's is siting of new power generation and energy infrastructure. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time letting you all talk about kind of the issues as you see them, as they came up in your different sector committee or different advisory group committee. And then we'll have like a little bit of next steps, and then we will have public comment at the end, just because that's part of one of our values. We really think that's important, and so if there are members of the public who have things to add, we would love to hear from that at the very end. So that's kind of our agenda today. Colleen, you can go to the next one. So I think we should just jump right in with introductions, and so again, we're going to be talking about kind of siting of infrastructure, and so we kind of selected some folks who we thought were working in that space or were knowledgeable of some of the concerns that might be associated with that. And so if we could get everybody to introduce yourself, we're going to try to spend no more than a minute per person on each introduction. This is just a chance for you to kind of give your name and your affiliation, to talk about if you're a member of the task force writ large, or which sector committee or advisory group you are participating on. And then if you have time, something you're looking forward to talking about today in the discussion today. And so I think that's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to just go ahead and call on people and have them go. And so Ann Vale, you're first on my list. So if you wouldn't mind, could you just say hello today?
Hi, my name is Ann Vale. I'm Executive Director of Louisiana Clean Fuels, and I am on the Transportation Sector Committee. And one of the things I'm looking forward to talking about today is collaborating across different organizations and groups to make sure that when we're planning our electric vehicle charging infrastructure or other alternative fuel infrastructure, that we really take into consideration the different types of use cases that there will be, whether it's a fleet, commerce, tourist travel, or individuals traveling within the state. They all have different considerations. So
thanks so much. Thank you. Blake, can you go next?
Sure. Blake Canfield, Executive Counsel for Louisiana Department of Natural Resources. I'm in the legal advisory group, and I look forward to discussing, kind of how all the pieces fit together. We have different levels of government and different agencies on those levels, and so getting a better understanding of how each of those entities may play a role in siting decisions is kind of what I hope to learn and to discuss.
Thanks. And both Blake and Ann did a great job at their time limit too, so this is going great. Brad Lambert, would you go next, please?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Brad Lambert. I am the Deputy Secretary at Louisiana Economic Development. I also chair the Finance Advisory Group. And just, as we have preliminary discussions about these different forms of renewable energy, connecting that industry to the grid always comes up. So that's what I'm most looking forward to about today's discussion. Thanks so much, Charles.
Thank you, Brad. Brent Campbell, would you go next?
Okay, hang on. I'm Brent Campbell. I work with the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources, and I'm on the Mining and Oil and Gas Committee. Today, I'm just interested in all the feedback from the various different committee members on these various subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Camille, can you go next?
Hi, everyone. Camille Manning-Broom, President and CEO of the Center for Planning Excellence. I'm a task force member and also co-chair of the Land Use, Housing, and Building Subcommittee. I am interested to discuss the local land use practices and needs in terms of how the energy and infrastructure build out happens. Local codes and local support and public input is a critical component of any new siting of infrastructure. And so I'm glad to be talking to you all today.
Thanks, Camille. Donaldson, can you go next?
Hey, good morning. My name is Don Caffrey. I'm the Executive Director of the Louisiana Landowners Association, and I'm on the Mining and Oil and Gas Subcommittee, and I look forward to participating in this and seeing how our large landowner members can be good stewards of the environment and what we can do to assist with the task force moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Hewitt.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jason Hewitt. I'm with Sustainability Partners. We are infrastructure investors, particularly into green and sustainable technologies. So I love it all. I'm interested in everything. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to sit through all of the meetings I would very much love to do that, but very interested in the grid and also in transportation.
Thank you, Jason. John Sparling.
Yeah, hey guys, John Sparling. I'm Vice President of Midstream at Aethon Energy Operating. I'm a member of the Mining, Oil, and Gas Committee, and just looking forward to seeing how all of our different disciplines can come together and create some good ideas and a healthy discussion today.
Thank you. Everybody's doing awesome on their introductions too. Thanks for going through quickly. Catherine King, would you please go next?
Yes, good morning. Catherine King with King Miller. I'm also counsel for the Louisiana Energy Users Group, which is Entergy's the majority of their largest industrial customers. So today, certainly interested in discussion about siting and interconnection mechanisms that can both achieve the goals that have been set by the governor, as well as maintain reliable and economic power supply source.
Thank you. KT, would you go next, please? KT, you might be on mute still. Okay, we will come back to you. Mark, would you go next then?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There, sorry, I came in a little late. So we're just doing roundtable introductions.
We are just to let everybody know kind of your affiliation, which committee you're on with the Climate Task Force, and just anything you're interested to learn about today.
Yep. My name's Mark Jebbia. I'm Vice President of Environmental and Permitting for Williams. I'm on the Oil and Gas Committee, and definitely looking forward to just conversations around siting. I know siting and permitting pipeline projects and other types of infrastructure has been a big focus for me, and area that I've spent most of my time involved in across the country, especially in Louisiana.
Thanks so much. Monique, would you go next, please?
Good morning. My name is Monique Hardin. I'm with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice in New Orleans. I also serve on the legal advisory group for this task force. I'm interested in thinking through siting with lessons learned that we currently live with, where we have siting is equated with environmental racism, and how we can do better in the state for all people.
Thank you, Monique. Robbie Laborde.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. I represent, I work for CLECO. I'm the COO, and I basically run our generation and transmission operations group. I've been here for 30 years. I'm here with the subcommittee, the power delivery and production subcommittee, and I'm here to deliver the utility perspective and represent the utility perspective, and hopefully be able to contribute, how utilities can help reduce CO2 and meet the governor's targets. Thanks.
Thank you, Robbie. Takesha, would you go next, please?
Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. Good morning, everybody. My name is Takesha Collins-Wright. I am VP of Environmental Affairs and also General Counsel over at the Louisiana Chemical Association. I am on the Manufacturing and Industry Committee, as well as a member of the Legal Advisory Group. And I'm interested in everything, here to give the industry perspective. But I feel like over the past few months, we've all been in our own little silos. So I'm interested in us kind of working together, thinking outside the box, and really collaborating.
Thanks for that, Takesha. That is the goal. Great. Yolanda, would you go next?
This is Yolanda Righteous. I am the administrator of the Waste Permits Division with the Louisiana DEQ. I'm also a member of the task force, and to piggyback on what Takesha said, I'm also interested in discussions on more collaborative efforts with regard to siting.
Thank you very much. And then Chris Tyson, I saw you join. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. Chris Tyson, CEO of Build Baton Rouge. We are the redevelopment authority and land bank for East Baton Rouge City Parish. Certainly, we focus on urban revitalization, redevelopment, and so very interested in siting and thinking about land use and location, particularly given proximity of energy development to historically marginalized and disinvested communities, and thinking holistically about these issues in the context of coordinated holistic land development in the city. So happy to be with you. Also serve in the task force as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Colette, would you go next?
Yes, bonjour, y'all. Colette Pichon Battle here. Good to see everyone. I'm the Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, and I'm serving on the task force, also chairing the Equity Advisory Group, and excited to bring equity into this conversation, bring people into the conversation of siting, to be honest about what's hurting and harming Louisiana's people, and to come up with some solutions that help our great state hit the next best level. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Colette. And Tyler, would you go next?
Sure. Thank you, Charles. This is Tyler Gray. I'm the president and general counsel with Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association. I currently sit on the Climate Initiatives Task Force, the big task force, and then I'm also a member of the Legal Advisory Group. And then members of our staff are also members of the Mining, Oil and Gas Sector Committee, and then the Manufacturing Sector Committee. And so we have been very involved with the whole process and look forward to the continued conversation.
Thank you, Tyler. And KT, would you try to unmute again and introduce yourself? It didn't work last time.
While we're waiting for KT, I've got skipped, so I just wanted to make sure I introduced myself. Susan Floyd, I'm Senior Counsel Environmental for Energy Services, LLC. And then what I'm interested in discussing is what I'm always looking at, the environmental impact of what we're discussing today, and how we remediate and account for that as we move forward.
Thank you, Susan. And sorry I skipped you. Did I miss anybody else that did not get a chance to say hello? And there might be a few people in the attendees list that I'm going to promote in just a second, but I think we should move on and get the discussion going first, and then I'll do that when Colleen starts to talk a little bit. Or maybe Colleen, you could look over it and move some people in if you see them. However we can do that. So I guess I'll start off with just going back to a couple of context slides for everybody. I think we've got a really great group covering, just as a few people touched on, covering a lot of different sectors, a lot of different conversations that have been happening, but in silos. And the whole point of today is to try to bring everybody together a little bit on a couple topics that have come up repeatedly in these different meetings. And so as a reminder, though, we are, in the midst of our action development process. And so the deadline is obviously April 30th for people to turn in their actions. This is for whether you're a member of a committee or if you're a member of the public or just an interested person in general. After these workshops, the sector committees will meet again in May. And then at that point, they'll have the benefit of all the different submittals from the public and from everybody else. So sector committees will kind of go back to their respective kind of issue areas and sort through all the proposals that come to them. And so here we are today, kind of towards the end of that window, but still time to kind of refine actions and kind of fill some gaps if we need to, based on kind of these cross-sector conversations. And of course, as we're doing this on actions, we're also developing a process for evaluating strategy portfolios with the advisory groups. So while the sector committees met in March to talk about strategies and actions, the advisory groups met to talk about how we could, turn those fundamental objectives into criteria that could be used to kind of score and grade the different ideas that come in. And so if you're an advisory group member, next week, you should be getting your survey, we're calling it, which is basically hypothetical scenarios that we've developed to kind of show some of the limitations and expectations for different strategies that you could employ, different groups of strategies, And so the advisory groups are going to be kind of starting to look at those and score them. It's going to be a test drive for not just for kind of highlighting some information for the task force discussions, but also to kind of make sure that this process that we are going to use to evaluate actions works well and makes sense. And so we'll be doing that next week. And then later in the month, we'll be having some office hours for those folks in case there are questions or if we can provide any assistance on that. Thanks, Colleen. But today again is all about actions. And so we have got just the goal today basically is to improve draft action proposals that some of you might be working on or to identify new action proposals based on this cross-disciplinary discussion. We want to highlight, key technical, tactical, or implementation issues that will come up, whether we're talking about energy infrastructure or something, transportation infrastructure, all these different ideas that have already kind of been raised by this group. We are having 6 meetings like this over the next 3 days. So there'll be another one this afternoon and then 2 a day on Thursday and Friday. And this is the list of topics on the side. You can kind of see what has risen to the top in these different conversations, what's come up a lot that we feel like either needs to be talked about across sectors or wouldn't get talked about unless we pulled up one level up and talked about it overarching. So this is what we're going to be doing. And you should notice too that these meetings are not scheduled concurrently. So as I think Jason mentioned, if you want to attend more meetings, you are welcome to kind of listen in and see how the conversation's going. So we do, encourage that and we encourage collaboration, but we also didn't want to sign anybody up for more than we thought they could handle. And so we appreciate everybody being here today on this meeting. And Colleen, if you go to the next one, I'm about to get us going. I think today's meeting, it really is just about participation. Again, breaking down those silos and getting a discussion going. So please, this is about you guys having a chance to talk. And then on that though, do share the floor as much as possible. And then again, we want to stay action oriented. We want to improve action proposals that are being written or find new ones to write. And so no matter where the action comes from, they're all going to be evaluated in a transparent, structured process. And that's what we've committed to. And so we don't need to take apart the action today. We want to try to improve it and stay focused on that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen, who's really going to introduce the topic and then get the real meat of the meeting going.
Great. Thank you, Charles. And good morning, members. I'm Colleen McHugh. I'm with the Water Institute, the Gulf Senior Planner. We're supporting Governor's Office on the planning team for the climate initiatives. So I've seen many of you on meetings to date, and Charles and I will be co-facilitating the conversation today. And as Charles just mentioned, the goal is really for this to be a discussion driven by all of you. So our intention is to do this with a pretty light touch, and just make sure that we're keeping the conversation going and identifying those key next steps with all of you. So I'm going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes just teeing up the discussion, and then we'll get right into it. So as a brief overview,
Colleen.
Yep.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Your next note slide is up. Over. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thank you. This has happened to me recently as well, and I'm not sure why. Thank you for that. Try this again. Is that the right slide now? Or
yeah,
can
you're good.
Great. Thank you, Camille. All right. So to tee us off, multiple strategies and actions that have been raised across a number of the sector committees require building new infrastructure. And several committees have identified, that where, and as all of the intros this morning discussed as well, that where this infrastructure should go and how it relates to the existing human and physical landscape of Louisiana are really critical questions for us to think through together. And members have highlighted some common legal, environmental, social, and equity considerations across multiple types of infrastructure. So we want to spend this cross-disciplinary meeting time together today to dig into some of these cross-cutting issues around the siting of new power generation and energy infrastructure. And a bit more specifically, the desired outcomes for this meeting are to identify methods, elements, or considerations related to siting that must be a part of any action proposal involving new infrastructure, and also to identify specific next steps to refine existing draft actions, develop new proposed actions, and to address some of those key implementation issues across multiple actions. So as I mentioned, the committees have raised questions of infrastructure siting and some of these cross-cutting legal, social, and environmental considerations as it relates to a number of different kind of types of infrastructure. So renewable power production and transmission capacity, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS, and then also transportation infrastructure. So the siting of electric vehicle charging infrastructure and infrastructure to support alternative modes of transportation. So we want to have a discussion that looks at common considerations across these strategies, but also to ground our discussion and some of the specific issues that many of you or other members of committees that you're on are working through on these and other action proposals. So the siting of infrastructure, of course, is not a new challenge, and decisions and regulations fall under planning and permitting jurisdictions at the local, state, and federal level. One of the things we want to kind of consider and discuss today is what is the current state of play, and where there may need to be, additions or adaptations of those existing processes and mechanisms. And we know that part of the question of infrastructure siting involves a sort of technical suitability analysis. So this is from Dr. Larson's presentation that you all saw back in February on the Princeton Net Zero Pathways study. This is looking at solar and wind suitability and potential infrastructure outgrowth to 2050 in one of the scenarios. And this looks at carbon dioxide, transport and storage network infrastructure, potential suitability as well in that time frame. But our intention today is to focus less on those technical suitability issues around specific infrastructure and hone in on these questions that would most benefit from an interdisciplinary discussion. So we've highlighted and sent to all of you in a primer in advance some of these key questions and discussion topics. This, of course, is not comprehensive, but we wanted to sort of get everybody thinking and coming to the table with some initial thoughts. So key questions around land use considerations. How do we strategically site new infrastructures and facilities within our existing built to natural environment? Land access and maintenance considerations. What are barriers or opportunities to accessing land for new infrastructure? Who is ultimately owning and maintaining infrastructure? Environmental justice and health concerns. What analysis is needed to understand and to avoid or minimize the potential negative consequences to communities living near new infrastructure and or facilities? Equity considerations. How do we ensure that the benefits, be it monetary or quality of life of new infrastructure, are distributed fairly? And environmental considerations. How do we mitigate the potential negative consequences to the natural environment and harness the potential co-benefits to the siting and design of new infrastructure? So I think if it sounds all right with everyone, we thought that it might make sense to sort of chunk our discussion together into sort of two sections. We've got probably a little bit over an hour of discussion together today. So starting with the first half hour focused on land use considerations and land access considerations, and then spending the second half of the hour really honing on those environmental justice and health concerns, equity considerations, and environmental considerations. I'm just gonna bring back up again, just to get us all thinking about the desired outcomes of this meeting. Again, we want to identify some of those specific methods, elements, or considerations related to siting that must be part of any action proposal involving new infrastructure. And then also to identify specific next steps as it relates to refining existing draft actions, or if there are new proposed actions that we would like to recommend developing. And then also to address some of those key implementation issues that are gonna need to be tracked through this year and beyond as we move forward with this work. So I'll bring us back to these key questions. I would like to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other's faces. I think these same key questions are in the primer that we sent last week. So if you'd like to bring those up on your screen to track as we discuss. Again, I think let's start with the first half hour on issues related to land use and land access. And then make sure we're leaving plenty of time for all of the very important issues around environmental justice, health equity, and environmental concerns for the second half hour. And with that, might just ask to open it up and see if anyone would like to get us started. If anyone would like to kick off the conversation, either specifically related to one of these key questions, or if there's an action or strategy that you're thinking about some of these issues around land use and land access.
Hi, this is Anne. I have an easy kind of no-brainer one to get started, and it's renewable natural gas. It's not going to require any new land use changes, as far as we're not going to be adding landfills anywhere. This is with an existing landfill that is already capturing and flaring their methane. There are about maybe 6 or 7, I believe, in the state of Louisiana. We could check with DEQ on that. Since they already have the infrastructure underneath their landfills to capture and flare the methane, they're prime candidates for taking that and producing renewable natural gas. One of the things that it does when you take the methane and you turn it into renewable natural gas is it reduces the terrible smells. So it's quite, it's very beneficial for the people who are around the landfills, but you can either feed it directly into a pipeline. So we need to make sure there's adequate natural gas pipelines nearby, or you can use it directly to fuel natural gas refuse trucks. So it's the equivalent of having, say, like a flex fuel vehicle with the natural gas trucks, because you can use renewable natural gas or natural gas. But when you put it into the pipeline, it's, I guess you could call it like the equivalent of adding biodiesel to diesel. You're greening and cleaning up the natural gas fueling infrastructure. So it's one of those things that is easy implementation with some education and working with the landfills right now the DEQ is aware of. And it's a fantastic way to turn trash into fuel. So that's pretty much all there is. We are doing an action template for that. I'm working with the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas. So there will be one submitted on how to increase the production of renewable natural gas in the state of Louisiana.
And are there any questions as you're filling out that action proposal that you'd have for this group, or that that you've been considering from this angle of citing or co-citing of pieces of this that might either be helpful to get this group's input on, or that might be helpful as ways of framing as we consider some of these other kind of questions around infrastructure citing?
I just saw something pop up saying that we already use renewable natural gas in the garbage trucks in New Orleans. Most of the trash trucks in the country are using natural gas instead of diesel these days, but we only have one local source of renewable natural gas at St. Landry Parish. So renewable natural gas comes from, say, landfills, dairies, and wastewater treatment. In Louisiana, we pretty much the only prime source, because we don't have large dairies in our state, would be from the landfill. And we need to increase the production of that so that there are more sources. Right now, they would just be putting it directly into a pipeline, or you would have to truck the natural gas from St. Landry Parish to a fleet somewhere in the state. So I think the expanding the production, which will give more access to the rest of the state. Everyone has landfills, so it's fairly equitable, especially if we can find the siting of that and make sure that it's across the state. But otherwise, we pretty much kind of have it down as far as our application, the action proposal. I just want to make sure that this is something that is considered, and because it is such an easy no-brainer, we just have to make sure that the pipeline is there and that the landfills get the support that they need. And it's a great way if you utilize RENs, and if you have a renewable fuel standard and some other things added to it, it makes it actually very profitable for small municipalities. So it's a revenue generator for St. Landry Parish. It's paid for itself.
Thanks, Ann. Monique, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Colleen. I don't agree with calling natural gas a finite source that contributes to the pollution that warms our planet a renewable energy source. So when I read the primer for this meeting and saw renewable energy power production and transmission of capacity, I was thinking about bona fide renewable energy sources, not using the name renewable in front of a dirty energy source like natural gas. The other considerations that are there, which is turning landfills into incinerators, it has a tremendous air quality problem, and using natural gas also contributes to pollution of particulate matter that is having devastating effects on Black people around the country because of their proximity to these kinds of sources of combustion.
So renewable natural gas is not a fossil fuel at all. It comes from naturally decomposing organic matter. So we would be replacing the natural gas fossil fuel. They just, once you clean the natural gas from the methane that is naturally emitting, you're able to replace the natural gas with that. And we already have a strong infrastructure with that. And we wouldn't be creating incinerators at the landfills. It would be preventing them from flaring it. Actually, by burning methane, it is better for the environment than letting it release into the environment, because when you release methane into the environment, that is a greenhouse gas. And so it's actually cleaner. We can show stats on that from national labs that shows the reduction in all the particulate matter and the pollutions and such. So if you're interested in that, I can definitely share all the statistics and the research on the use of renewable natural gas. Like I said, it is not a fossil fuel. It is comes directly from decaying organic matter.
Katie, you have your
Yes. Good morning, everybody. When I read the primer, one of the things that struck me was the fact that, land use regulations and land use restrictions and how the state works with this in order to site a new facility. We already have enough issues with even expanding a facility right now. So how is that going to be possible really without changing the regulations or changing the state rules really to make possible that new facilities can be sited? That has got to be a part of the recommendation from this group.
Thanks, Katie. think there was a number of kind of great and important things raised there. One thought that flags for me too is just definitions, right? And how we understand the various kinds of solutions that we're looking at and understand the impacts of them. I wonder if we can sort of take a step back here too and think about land use considerations more broadly, sort of across infrastructure and a bit holistically. So I'm wondering if Camille or if Chris could perhaps help steer us in that conversation as well, from a more community land use perspective here.
Sure, Chris, you want to go first? You want me to?
I'm gonna let you go first.
So 2 points. Back to something I want to highlight when Monique was talking. I think it's really important to make sure that in our land use considerations, that past historical events of land use and environmental justice issues are at the forefront and are taken into consideration, and the community is part of the decision making and what happens in their community. We don't have a statewide agency or entity that is setting the goals, the mandate, the bar for land use considerations across the state. And so a lot of times these are done at the either parish or municipality level, although there are state agencies that within their programs are doing siting and negotiating around different developments that occur that don't necessarily meet the jurisdictions, local zoning or zoning codes and so forth. We're not a state that has had a lot of planning and management of land and resources at the forefront. And so we've been watching the paradigm shift on that, and I'm hopeful, but we still have a ways to go. I think it's going to be really important. One thing that I'm interested in is working with local communities on perhaps developing some model solar ordinances or model ordinances to help communities so that when any new infrastructure comes in or expansion of infrastructure, there is a standard that meets other national standards to ensure public participation, to ensure visioning, and to ensure that the codes don't do harm to communities and individuals. And so I'll just kick that off in terms of a bigger picture around land use considerations, and I know Chris will touch all the points that I missed.
No, I don't think you missed anything, Camille. I think, and again, following Monique's observation, this is a huge issue for the state, and I think the state vis-a-vis the nation, right? I mean, we talk about Cancer Alley has always been relegated to certain interests in certain communities, and I think that can't continue to be the case. This has to kind of be brought into the center of discussion, and we have to deal with the legacy of the disparate impact of the state's environmental track record and investments and industry involvement on mostly poor, mostly rural Black communities, and particularly given the prominence of that in South Louisiana as we kind of see the Baton Rouge and New Orleans corridor continuing to emerge as a state super region. That is a defining issue for life for many people who live along the corridor. And so at the very least, right, we have to have a very robust level of engagement. And I think that involves some opportunity to have a real listening period and some sort of reckoning with where we are with this history of disparate impact on these communities. I also want to echo Camille's point about the lack of any statewide land use planning in Louisiana. That for me and somebody who's taught these issues for the last 10 years at LSU Law School, I'm always raising for my students as we look across the country and see countless examples of things that, hey, the glaring issue here in Louisiana is that we don't believe in any comprehensive land use planning to our detriment, right? And we see that, in our metropolitan areas and on the metropolitan level, we are coming to understand the value of planning when it comes to the management of these tremendous natural resources and the industries that thrive off of them, and the impact that has on communities, to say nothing of what we know we're going to continue to experience with coastal land loss and climate change, particularly again in the super region and South Louisiana being on the forefront of that. There's a heightened, I think, need for some considerable statewide land use planning as we think about this, and I hope that's something that will come out of this process. So I'll stop there. You're really just reinforcing, what Camille said, but important issues.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris and Camille, and thank you for highlighting a couple of, I think, specific mechanisms too, right? Like statewide land use planning and having a statewide agency that is, supporting land use planning. Camille, you also mentioned working with communities on model ordinances and model standards and ensuring public participation in that process. What else in terms of sort of specific mechanisms when we look back at those jurisdictions where we impact infrastructure siting? What are some of those other opportunities?
I think tying into public health as well, and ensuring that we have good protocols for tracking and measuring and kind of quantifying public health impacts, so that we, have centralized data and good data about this going forward. And, that's just one thing that I would throw out.
Maybe somebody from, oh, sorry, Monique, go ahead, please.
Just on Colleen's question, and I think one of what Camille and Chris were saying about the need for state land use planning, you just said in a nutshell a lot of the kind of quandary that I was having in my head, and that's very helpful. So thank you for that. I think that's a very important, strong recommendation I would support. And I was also thinking about the opportunity for engaging city and parish land use and planning governmental bodies on this executive order and the goals, and basically having this kind of a conversation with folks who do this as part of their jobs in all of Louisiana's parishes and cities with that kind of jurisdiction. I think that's just to lend into the work around community-based organizations and members of communities also being engaged. I think the folks who have that decision-making authority need to be at least have some conversations and thinking through how they go about their decision-making in a way that can meet these very important goals for the state.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Charles, were you going to call on somebody?
Well, no, I was just going to kind of think we've talked about how the state, things the state could do. Should be doing. I just wondered if anybody from the state had some thoughts on some of the processes they do go through, or maybe back to KT's point about, when infrastructure is being put in, what are some of the things that have to happen? Or I don't know if that would be helpful. But I do see Scott with the hand up, so maybe we should start there.
I think you're on mute, Scott.
There we go. I finally got it. Hey, good morning, Scott Gamble. I'm the Deputy Director for Alexandria International Airport. I'm on the Transportation Committee. And Charles, I'm sorry, I may have raised my hand a little too soon on this, but I know we're talking about land use planning, and there is low-hanging fruit out there in Louisiana, and that's airports. We have 7 commercial airports, and all the airports are required to have land use planning. And one of the things I'm kind of circling back to when we were talking about the fuels earlier is alternative fuels. The airlines now are looking, to start utilizing alternative fuels. And matter of fact, United is very aggressive in their utilization of alternative fuels. And one of the things that, again, going back to the low-hanging fruit comment, is that we could, airports all have fuel farms. And with the alternative fuels coming in, that's one way we could do it very quickly. I mean, this would not take anything at all to start, lowering the carbon footprint on the utilization of fuels and aircraft. So that's one thing I think we ought to look at and put on there to work with, even the DOTD aviation division of the state and start looking at all our commercial airports as far as putting in alternative fuel farms at airports. Very easy. Every airport in the state has a fuel farm. We're actually looking at it here in Alexandria ourselves right now, doing that. And then going back to land use planning also, when we get to the point of the discussion is solar farms. So I know we'll get there later on, but one of the things with the airports, we have the ability to, without having to go through all the permits and requirements, most of the airports. So that is going back, something that airports we can really do something in a hurry, in a short time frame to lower our carbon footprints in the areas of alternative fuels and solar fields. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Scott. To jump back to Charles's prompt, is there anybody from the state side who would like to kind of chime in at this point?
Yeah, if possible, I will. So again, Blake Hanfield, DNR. Looking at the current state, I think the way that that Chris stated is correct. You don't have that statewide land use type of standard. You have instead separate programs which typically have an environmental focus, and within that there may be there are often considerations of alternative site analysis, but it's not a robust or kind of standard type of land use planning. The other thing I wanted to mention, and there are probably many people in here who have better understanding of this than I do, for some of these, such as electric transmission, I wonder what type of, maybe federal programs are out there. So for instance, I'm thinking about like natural gas pipelines, if they're interstate pipelines. I know that FERC has a lot of regulation over those, and I know they consider some of the right-of-way and siting issues within their authority. In some cases, you may have federal government entities that will, basically have complete reign in a particular field over particular, projects. In other words, the state may not be allowed to directly challenge or change any of those types of decisions that are happening at the federal level.
Hey, Blake, I'm wondering if does DEQ or DNR use any kind of, like, the EPA has an environmental justice siting tool to ensure that there aren't any negative or harmful effects to community or people for the health and quality of life of people. Do you see, I don't know if either of the agencies use any such tools or regulations, or if you all would be open to that?
Yeah, so I don't want to speak for DEQ, but I do know, for instance, the Class 6 UIC program that is working on CCUS injection facilities will have a EJ program pursuant to their agreement with EPA for primacy. And so they are very much interested in building that up. So this is a new program that they are working on, and it is not, hasn't been created yet, but definitely something that they're looking to use.
And this is Yolanda Righteous with the Louisiana DEQ. I'll chime in with regard to our permitting process. There is a siting component, and that would come in as facilities submit an environmental assessment statement as part of the requirement that goes along with a new application or a renewal application where there's some type of major modification included in that particular renewal application. So a facility has to make a demonstration that they have considered alternative sites as well as alternative projects. And that's typically part of what's commonly referred to as those IT questions. So that is a component of the permitting process at DEQ for water, air, and waste permits.
Mark, you have your hand raised.
I do, thank you. I think like the reference you made to FERC is actually a good model to consider of, when citing infrastructure, actually having a lead agency that's responsible for coordinating amongst other agencies. And so, in the state, when you start thinking about all the components that are really required to be evaluated and balanced when looking at land use considerations all the way through wetlands and endangered species, it's very effective to have an agency charged as that lead agency to balance all of these and to make sure that all the way to a local community, local stakeholders, there's a common way to engage in the process. And one thing, I do a lot of work in Louisiana, but also have done work in 24 other states. And one thing we see pretty often is when there's a lot of different avenues for public comment, it almost becomes overwhelming. And it's really hard to engage local stakeholders. The more consistent that can be made, where it's clear on how to get engaged and how to have your voice heard, it's much more effective to be able to bring that in as a key consideration.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's a really interesting recommendation there as well. And I think we're flagging kind of both the jurisdictions around and sort of planning around land use, but also around permitting. And I think that's kind of an interesting kind of relationship potentially to think about in terms of this as well. Camille, I know you mentioned that you're working on a proposal around doing statewide land use planning. Maybe to take a step back even and just look at that from a sort of vision perspective. What does, from your perspective or from others' perspectives, sort of what does that vision for land use planning that incorporates, both these considerations around climate mitigation and new infrastructures, but also, climate adaptation sort of look like? What are some of the things that you're incorporating into that?
Yeah, this was really challenging because the template is set up to really want specific action items, but there's so many, in land use and in planning, everything's connected. And so we're starting at a higher strategy level, and then we have a number of action items that will be included. And the reason is that there's no one place to direct it all. And so first, the larger strategy is to create a framework for what such an entity would look like, and then including the action items under that on what things that entity would do. And so one piece, and I put in the chat, is implement land use decisions that reduce risk and mitigate greenhouse gases by incentivizing compact development patterns and disincentivizing new development in areas without existing infrastructure. And so, really getting a hold of, we can't continue to build out our infrastructure and be able to pay for it. We've got to focus on where there's existing infrastructure and stopping the amount of sprawl that's occurring and leading to increased greenhouse gases. So it goes from everything around, development decisions to, transfer of development rights and conservation trust funds, developing educational programs, enhancing data and analysis, evaluating the applicability of existing models like net zero zones, lead ND, smart city. And so I'm happy to share my organization, CPEX. We're taking the lead on this recommendation. And if anyone in the power distribution or anyone on here wants to contribute to that recommendation, I'd be happy to work with you. We'll have a draft of it shortly, and then are circulating to others next week so that we can get other input before we finalize it. And so while I have the floor, I would like to talk with whomever on the power distribution committee around developing a recommendation for model ordinances on solar. And the reason being is I've been working with a number of rural parishes that are not too keen on big solar installations happening. And we're meeting frequently with Tangipahoa Parish and others, and I'd like to figure out a solution and recommendation there to make solar look more beneficial to communities, or to ensure that the perceived issues around solar aren't actualized if implemented at the community level.
Camille, can you elaborate on what the opposition to solar in those communities is based around?
Yeah. And so generally that they don't provide the benefits in terms of there's a perception that, it takes over what's right now nice rural land. And so it's an eyesore. So we can come up with screening recommendations on that to screen them. There's the biggest issue is around the decommissioning plan for solar. And a lot of communities point to, or the ones that we've been meeting with, that there's been no decommissioning of oil wells. And so what would make this any different? How can communities get reassurance that there will be a decommissioning plan? And so we could put that in a model ordinance. And then the fact that the parishes don't see a lot of revenue or resources from the installation, and so Terrence Chambers, who's also on the task force, we've asked him to meet with some of these parishes, because what we understand is that the parishes and communities start getting the benefit when they have a wide array of different types of solar, from the home installations to the larger, big and more industrial installations. And so we're trying to understand all of this so that we can respond to and support our communities as we move forward.
Thanks, Camille. I see Ann Vales had her hand up for a minute. And then I think, Robbie, it'd be great if you could kind of chime in a little bit if you have anything to add, just kind of on how you're thinking about bringing in renewables, maybe new infrastructure that doesn't currently exist. And then I think after that, we should probably switch over to that second topic that we wanted to hit, which is some of the environmental justice and equity concerns and those things, if that's okay.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I apologize if I get too specific and into the weeds really quickly, because that's the way we think with Louisiana Clean Fuels. We're all about implementing projects. But I'd like for us, when we're making these discussions, the statewide planning and the permitting and all this, that's so super important. In parallel, at the same time, if we could also consider the actual on the ground fueling infrastructure, there's slightly different needs. We have to take the end user in mind when it comes to the fueling infrastructure, whether it's electric vehicles or other alternative fuels. Just want us to point out that we need to kind of have the two separate things going in parallel, because like I said, it's very different considerations as far as who's using the vehicle, how the vehicle's being used, and when it comes to siting of a vibrant and a good, well-usable fueling infrastructure, because there are equity concerns of equity of access for those. That's it, just to make that point that they're kind of like two different things. that we should consider.
Thanks, Ann. Robert, do you have any thoughts on kind of where this has been so far, or is it okay if we switch over to next topic?
So just to make some general comments, right? I mean, look, and here's the issue. We've got and this is the reason the governor sort of structured the whole thing this way, right? You've got every point of view imaginable on here, and there's tension among all those points of views. And the secret is how do we land in the middle somewhere, right? Everybody's not going to exclusively get everything that aligns perfectly with their interest. And we all need to understand that. Hopefully we do. I think we do. And what's better for the state. But I always go back when I'm thinking about, I don't agree with this person. I go back to, okay, what is the goal that the governor has set for this whole task force? And I'll restate it again. Maybe it's warranted to do that. It's to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% by 2025, which by the way is tomorrow. that's right around the corner. And then 40 to 50% by 2030, and then 100% by 2050. So just the first goal at 2025 is incredibly challenging. And just speaking from the utility standpoint in Louisiana, and I'll speak for CLECO. I do have the other utilities in mind, co-ops and other publicly owned utilities. Is that our contribution obviously is a switch from fossil fuels to renewables, and that's going to accomplish this in the quickest way from our sector's contribution of CO2 emissions. And so we've already started with a plan for that, but that involves retiring initially. So the steps are retiring coal plants and replacing that capacity with renewables. And then you have to address, ultimately, that's not by 2020. This is not by 2025, looking at the rest of the fossil fuel fleet and how do we make them more efficient. I don't think that in my life, of course, I'm older than a lot of you on here, but in my lifetime, we'll be able to exit from fossil fuels altogether because we need the grid stable. By the way, there's nothing that helps the society more than having a stable and reliable electric grid, right? Electricity has taken us from arcane ages to now where we have a prosperous society. And we have to think about the 3 Ps, people first, and I put people, the planet, and prosperity. Those 3 things, the prosperity of all groups involved. And so I think the quickest way to get some of those reductions is that order of replacing coal-fired capacity in the state. There's 6 units. CLECO's involved in 5 of them. There's 6 coal-producing units, which, by the way, have had significant reductions in their CO2 emissions already, and is going to be a big key in when we establish the baseline from 2005. We've already made huge contributions there. But so having a plan to unwind those coal plants, deactivate them somehow, and replace them with renewable capacity. And really the primary viable renewable capacity is solar. And I was very interested to hear Camille, because I really haven't, unfortunately, taken the time to go out and talk to some of these people in the community. So I appreciate your perspective of telling me what people in the communities think about solar. I'm just sort of thinking, hey, everybody likes this renewable, and probably so, the concept, but except for the person who lives next door to the solar farm, probably isn't so hyped up about seeing trees cut and solar panels replacing it. But if you want to hit this goal, that's probably the steps that we need to take. We're embarking on that. There are a huge amount of issues, Charles, and this is where the devil gets in the details about stranded cost of pollution controls that we've already invested in. How do we pay for that? Depreciate that fully, and then enter into those solar farms. Louisiana renewables is going to be driven by solar, whether it's rooftop or central station solar, 50, 100 megawatts. That's going to be a must, and we're going to have to provide the policy, the siting capability of this. If we really want to meet that CO2 goal, we're going to have to do that initially. And I said all this. There's not an easy answer for it, unfortunately. But that's why we're all sitting here, to try to at least start the ball rolling in that way. And so I didn't give you anything to probably make sure you teleprompt the governor very quickly and say, hey, we solved the issue, but that's a perspective.
Appreciate that, Robbie.
All right, so I think we're about halfway through our discussion time. I want to make sure we're kind of pivoting and doing that deeper dive on the sort of second half of the topic on environmental justice, health, equity considerations, and environmental considerations. And I think, one of the things to frame here is that with this new infrastructure, there are questions, of course, with mitigating some of the potential negative consequences or avoiding potential negative consequences, and also ensuring equitable access to some of the co-benefits. So Anne mentioned, for example, siting of EV infrastructure, making sure that infrastructure is accessible to everyone and affordable to everyone. So to kind of tee that off, and also recognizing that there are, I think existing mechanisms or even mechanisms that are being developed. It was helpful to hear from Blake on some of the things that are being considered with Class 6 policy for CCUS and environmental justice considerations. I think one of the ways we should think about grounding this discussion is, as Monique framed for us at the start, how do we look back and do better as we move forward? And what are the specific kind of mechanisms? Where can we, within permitting processes or otherwise, make sure that we're considering very specifically and very holistically these issues around justice and health and equity environment. Susan, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Colleen. So I was just going to add and kind of dovetail on what Robbie shared. I think it's important for us to also, we're looking within the state, and I know we've talked about the federal implications as well, which I think goes directly to these environmental justice issues. It's very clear at the federal level that is going to become, it is all important and highlighted for the current administration. And so I just think there'll be resources that we need to consider as we move forward with this process that may become available at a federal level that we haven't had before, that may benefit us and facilitate our efforts, but also regarding other federal regulations like the Cross Air State Pollution Act. CASPR has been revised and updated, and there's significant considerations, especially for Louisiana, regarding those new standards that'll be required. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation, that it's important we are dovetailing with whatever may be on the horizon federally in those regulations, as well as what we're looking at specifically in Louisiana.
Thanks, Susan. I think that point on federal opportunity is an important one too, and making sure that we're positioning well for that. Colette, do you have some wise words to kind of help frame this second discussion topic for us?
Well, I don't know about wise words, but I'm always full of words. No, this has been really great. I really just want to say I also appreciated hearing the comment just about the airports. I just thought that Mr. Scott's comment about, I'm in one of those rural parishes that I'm watching the fact that we have no centralized land use planning. I'm watching building happening in St. Tammany on the side of the state that will go into the ocean. I'm watching it be marketed to Black folks moving out of New Orleans into St. Tammany Parish. I'm watching the equity issues. And it's just cutting down more trees that we know we should love. And so just thinking about like, where there already trees cut and where's there already capacity to put out solar farms where folks won't have that negative reaction. That just seems so smart. Anyway, Mr. Scott, I just really appreciated that comment. And I'm also, just reflecting on the way we're using the word equity as a synonym for equality, which is incorrect. And I'm wondering what is it going to take for us to really be able to articulate and absorb the distinction between equity and equality, right? There is no equity issue of access. That's not how to use that word, right? It becomes not just a notion that you mentioned, Monique said, it's the actual definition of equity, which is that in order to have an equitable solution, it must address the past and move toward the future. And that it's very difficult. It's not as easy as equality, right? Which is everybody should have access to a thing equally. And I'm just trying to think about how do we, across the board, get an equity understanding that does not get relegated to a synonym and then a checkbox. And so my wise words are mostly around not just looking at the opportunity or how we go forward, but like, how do we have the courage to be honest about what the problem is? The problem isn't just that we have coal-fired power plants accelerating the climate crisis. It's also that the decisions of our state leaders have targeted particular communities to have those plants next to them, landfills next to them, all of these things next to them. So how do we think of a solution that redresses harm and pushes us forward? And the courage to think like that, I think, is what I've really been thinking about. And I really want to just sort of, I'd like to make that charge to all of us coming in from those different perspectives, to try to think bigger. And bigger is not more profit. Bigger is not more government gain. Bigger is not a good result for a few people. How do we think bigger equity-wise? So we see a equity in end result as opposed to an equality in access to a new opportunity. So anyway, I know that's in the realm of the realms we're talking about nuts and bolts here, but I think about where these new ideas are going to go and who they're going to harm, and what we're willing to sacrifice and who ends up paying the price of our willingness to sacrifice. That's the part where I just want us to take a moment to be sure that we don't want to cause more burden, we don't want to cause more harm. Can our solutions be innovative and imaginative enough that we are not just not doing bad, but actually doing good? That's all I've got.
Thank you, Colette, for that kind of step back, right? Of us looking at what it is collectively we're trying to do with this work. And I know that the equity committee, the equity advisory group that you are chairing is working on a definition for climate equity that will help to guide our whole process. And I think that will be very important in how we think about sort of each piece of this work. I wonder if anyone, just following up on Colette's thoughts, have additional thoughts for how we ground that big picture thinking about equity of outcomes, and that important component of understanding past harms and how we think about this issue of siting.
I mean, I think you first have to have some, there has to be some truth and reconciliation process, right? I mean, it's to kind of borrow a phrase from South Africa, at least. There has to be some sort of recordation of what has happened, some sort of tracking, and that involves listening to communities, but also understanding exactly what we're talking about. And I think Colette is exactly right, that there is a lot of confusion in the terms equity and equality, and they mean very, very different things when we're talking about race, poverty, inequality, and the history of all of it, and the what I like to say, the cumulative impact of that history on the present and how it kind of continues to operate in the moment, right? Gaps don't naturally close, right? It's just kind of the law of compound interest. They naturally widen unless there is some, significant intervention to course correct. And so I just want to emphasize everything Colette said. And if we're kind of thinking methodologically about what a next step is, I think as I think Colette is kind of intimated, you kind of have to take the bold step of being honest about, okay, what are we talking about specifically? What has happened, and chronicling that and measuring that and telling that story and having everybody listen and absorb and understand that as a necessary starting point to what you're doing. The idea being that out of that type of approach, you really have a powerful opportunity to create national models and best practices. Absent that approach, you will most certainly exacerbate existing cycles of harm and marginalization already underway.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else want to chime in there? And I think that point on methods is good as well. Methods and mechanisms for doing that. If this is another opportunity to maybe ask some of our state agency folks for some perspective on this as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of feel like the points I'm going to raise are almost inconsequential, in following up on the statements from Colette and from Chris. But I guess first and foremost, the aspect of listening, is going to be a major part of any EJ program. So again, talking with the Class 6 group at DNR, I think that is one way to try to, document on a specific, application case, what the communities in an area have experienced and what their concerns are. I also wanted to just point out, an area that I think we're going to need to think through is how do we combine or, implement the EJ process with the existing environmental processes and reviews. For instance, I know a lot of environmental regulation deals with, kind of siting of infrastructure in existing right-of-ways, for instance, to limit the impact on environmental resources. But if you're, if the EJ concern is that, historically it's, these facilities have been sited, next to an EJ community, and your environmental review is saying you want to site it in the same place, then I could see some disconnect there between trying to reach the goals of environmental justice and what the environmental regulations ask you to look at first. So I don't have an answer for that. I just wanted to point that out as something to
Blake, let me interject just on that last point, just as a clarifying sentence here, because I think starting by understanding that a community being Black or poor in Louisiana is not what makes it an EJ community, right? It becomes an EJ community after that sighting of that dangerous thing near that community. And now, by definition, it's an EJ community because of its proximity to these toxins. But what is actually happening, and that's another word we shouldn't, let's it's another thing we should just get clear about, like the creation of the EJ communities, and then the renewal of renewal of something that's really quite toxic becomes a way to just deal with the EJ community, as opposed to dealing with how we make decisions that impact Black communities or poor communities or other communities of color disproportionately, and creates them into those EJ communities. And I'm not saying that to you, I know you know that difference, but I'm just saying it because I think this is getting to some of the problem. We're starting with solutions as though we don't have a bigger problem. And we do have a bigger problem, which is the way particular communities get targeted to bear a burden on someone else's really great idea that makes profit for a whole other group of people and harms the folks that it's near. That's really the bigger sort of root problem. And as we're citing all of this stuff, we'll say, well, the pipelines are there already, or the thing is there already, the infrastructure is there already. And I agree with you, that's going to be a big disconnect, because the case is going to be made for the ease and the use of what is there without really examining how these things got to where they are in the first place. So I didn't mean to cut you off totally. I just wanted to make a distinction with the word EJ communities and how they become that way.
Jason, do you have something to jump in with?
Maybe look, just a question, maybe just some of the other panelists to bring this to a focus here. I think that was an excellent point, that because it's been there, we can put something back, right? That's kind of the point that I'm hearing, and maybe that makes financial sense, or maybe that makes some sort of permitting sense. But is there a movement in the state agency side to what we're seeing as a company across the country is, I think this was touched on earlier, is waste to something. So waste to energy or something along those lines. Is there a move to say that, hey, this has got to be part of your planning and your solution? Because if you can take the first, you can't remove something that people drive by and look at and say it's ugly. But if you can start taking the first step of saying, hey, we're going to make sure that ugly thing is not further harming, the environment or society that it's adjacent to, that's a pretty good first step. So is that part of any kind of DEQ planning or anything like that's currently being done or under consideration?
Okay, this is Yolanda Righteous again with DEQ. It's not part of the current framework, the permitting framework, and I'm not aware of any pending requirement to incorporate that into the permitting process, but I will make note of what you're saying and bring it back to the group.
I'm thinking about something that Mark Jebbia raised, and I think we might have lost Mark, but raised earlier in the meeting around a state agency that would centralize some of these permitting questions too. And thinking about, how do we consider these things, at all of these different points, right? So consider in our overall planning process, but also consider in the evaluation of solutions that come through. And is that something that should be considered in terms of environmental justice analyses, that they, that there be a bit more of a centralized way that the state is approaching that. That's an open question. I don't know if anyone has thoughts. Monique, I'm sure you have some good thoughts on this topic from a kind of legal mechanism perspective as well.
Yeah, Colleen, I'm sorry. Your how you did the lead-in was a little hazy for me. I don't know if you mind restating.
Sure. So Mark had mentioned earlier on that there might be some benefit in having, a centralized state agency coordinating permitting, because right now these things are permitted across multiple state agencies, and whether there should also be, some level of a statewide environmental justice policy or even kind of evaluation process that is consistent across, that provides some of that consistency across agencies.
Yeah, I kind of see this in two parts. One part is looking at the regulatory infrastructure that we have in the state of Louisiana, which has never gotten a good report from the Louisiana legislative auditor. The most recent report for DEQ showed that it takes almost 2 years for there to be any enforcement action on a violation that's found at a industrial facility here in the state that's more likely than not operating in close proximity to a Black community or other community of color. And so, and DNR has a pretty poor record with regards to managing oil and gas wells as well. So it seems that, to me, those agency problems really need to be reckoned with, because I think our task force shouldn't ignore that or disregard that or presume that it's working well when we know, in fact, it's not. But even if they were operating at their optimal best, you would still have exposure and hazardous risk for communities, mostly Black communities here in the state of Louisiana, and that's a problem. One of the ideas that members of the legal advisory group that I've been working with on criteria for equity and criteria for, I think it's called safe and healthy communities, have focused on is vetting projects or actions that come through the task force for equitable outcomes, from the standpoint from planning, operation, whatever service or product is generated, having those phases go through this vetting process in terms of what the task force ultimately recommends has met this process. And I think more, I don't know, I mean, with the time frame we have within the task force, this opportunity for community sessions that get at this idea of a truth and reconciliation process, I think is vitally important. So all eyes are opened in terms of this, what we're trying to do in the state of Louisiana. If we don't start with where the inequities are, we're going to miss them and potentially perpetuate them.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. I want to make sure we're maybe calling on some folks who haven't had a chance to talk yet. I wonder, Charles, if you could help me.
Sure, and then maybe as we're doing that, I think we've been talking about really big, important issues, and maybe kind of to Ann's earlier point, maybe should we focus in on some specific actions that folks are working on, and maybe we can try to apply some of these thoughts that we've heard to something that's happening. So I don't know if Catherine, King, or Brent, if you guys are aware of any actions that are really trying to grapple with the siting of infrastructure and some of these hard questions that folks have kind of been raising today. Or maybe you, Brad. I mean, I know the LED's like constantly trying to recruit, new operations into the state. Are there some things that you've heard that are helpful or sound like something that's happening already?
This is Brad, and I'll just kind of add this. In very preliminary discussions that maybe our agency or other agencies have had thus far with those who might be considering some of these renewable operations and thinking about carbon capture. I think when it comes to siting, the geology might drive where the best places are where that carbon should go underground. And the science says that it's going to stay there, which is what we want to see happen. We don't want it to migrate or get out if the carbon is taken out of the air and put in the ground. And so to some extent, where those sinks are, the geology kind of dictates that. Or in the case of offshore wind, if somehow down the line, 2 or 3 years from now, that private sector companies want to put offshore wind terminals in the Gulf of Mexico in either state waters off the coast of Louisiana or federal waters off the coast of Louisiana, where those cables come back to those generating facilities or transmission facilities are going to somehow have to line up generally where those turbines are located in the Gulf. I guess at that point it becomes, if it's determined that there are disparate impacts, what are the mitigation measures that can be taken? But again, in listening to the conversation, the very thoughtful conversation this morning, that those are just kind of some of the things that have popped into my head about, again, geology kind of dictating where this carbon goes underground. And then again, the location of terminals that may be offshore, that where the wind blows the most and can capture this energy, renewable energy, and then get it to the grid. Again, that's going to just have to kind of line up some geographically where those jackets or turbines are located. So again, that's very preliminary, very initial discussions as these renewable options become more of a potential reality. I'll just kind of, again, I probably didn't advance the discussion a whole lot, but those are a couple of thoughts that I had during this morning's discussion.
I really appreciate, I thought that was very helpful, Brad, even just how to think about it, and just to the direct question of how do we mitigate, right? If we see it going down a particular line, how do we mitigate? I think we have to ask the question, what happens if a cable transmitting offshore wind energy goes through a bad situation versus what happens if the really unknown science that we're associating with carbon capture, we're hoping and we're trying to hope, but this is really so unknown, and the impacts of getting that wrong are very different from a cable. If we really want to start thinking about the mitigation around equity, we have to begin by thinking about the source of the energy itself and the type of energy and the type of process that we're investing our dollars in. let's look at what the worst case scenario is of these investments, of these options on the communities that are nearest to them, on the broader ecosystem. And I think we should be spending more time really thinking about real renewables, which I agree with Monique's earlier comment on the word renewable. Like, we should be thinking about real renewables, not just because they are a source of renewed and generated energy, but because of the lower impact in a bad case scenario that they have on the communities around them. And I say this especially because we seem to be always talking about these solutions as though there isn't an accelerating and extremely increasing climate crisis that we're going to have to deal with. All of our perceptions of what life is actually shifting because the climate crisis is getting worse. So we almost have to start predicting more storms, predicting more problems, predicting more, just challenges. And then what are our options then? So I found your comments very helpful, Brad. Just even thinking about equity in those. So just gratitude on that one.
This is Brent Campbell with DNR. Talking about some of our action items, they don't involve really of citing like new infrastructure. We're looking at least I'm looking at the action items that I'm handling are, the reducing of flaring and venting of natural gas, leak detection at oil and gas facilities and repair and that type of thing. So it really, that aspect does not have to deal with, like I said, new infrastructure coming in. It's mainly existing stuff or equipment and all.
I'm just wondering if there are any other specific things that people are trying to work out. I think Brad was helping us kind of think about this, some of the practicalities of where this, the big idea of the thing we need, whether renewables meets the real life people on the ground, and how, how can we kind of better put some systems in place, or just make sure that we're thinking through things correctly. Does anybody else have anything really specific that can kind of get us there to see if we can kind of talk about that, kind of that implementation piece together before we kind of move on? Yeah, Anne, do you have something?
Yeah, I think we would need to have kind of a separate discussion. Of course, everybody still be able to be present, but it would be a technical session to talk about the different specific things that we need. So when we look at as far as the fueling infrastructure, there's a lot of technical things that we need to discuss while taking all the other things into consideration. It's, how do we get the power or the fuel to the site? What are the needs of existing fleets and individuals? And what are the projections of, we're going to need to be projecting out how many vehicles need to be converted to alternative fuel and electric vehicles, so we know what that end game is. Then we have to incrementally build out that infrastructure to always be a little one step ahead. We're not going to be able to build the entire infrastructure of tomorrow today, but we can stay a step ahead. So those projections are extremely important so that we can make sure that we're looking at aspects like how do people evacuate in evacuation routes? Do we have fueling infrastructure for everyone? How do we make sure that some communities don't get left out of these cleaner fuels? Because if we have these cleaner fuels in their area, the cleaner vehicles will be run in their areas. Businesses will, when you look at the larger businesses and interstate traffic, and the major fleets have extreme commitments to alternative fuels and reducing their emissions. They will run their vehicles where the infrastructure is. They will run their older, dirtier diesel vehicles through states and on corridors that do not have fueling infrastructure to support those vehicles. So the people in those communities will suffer with the diesel emissions going through those areas. So we want to ensure that doesn't happen. We don't want the businesses to run their dirtier vehicles through our state. We want to support that, and we want to support our own citizens. So there's interstate, intrastate, and community-based infrastructure planning that needs to happen on all levels. And there's a lot to think of and a lot to prepare for when it comes to electric vehicles for the future too. So we need to start thinking about it now, even though the medium and heavy duty work trucks may not be accessible and available right now. It takes a long time to plan to get there. So working with the utilities, communities and such is critical to start now. And we are already working. We're working with Hugo at CLECO. We're working with SWEPCO. We're working with Entergy to start working on those electric vehicle infrastructure plans. And it's important that we have state support as well.
Anybody else see a real next need that we have, like Ann saying, a technical deep dive for certain types of infrastructure? Anybody else have another kind of next step they would like to see kind of come out of this after today?
Charles, I wonder, I don't know what all the recommendations are that people have signed up to, but I'm assuming that most of them are around technical recommendations and maybe not approaches and processes. And so it may be where a subset of this group or this group gets back together to kind of co-develop a recommendation around siting and process of siting.
I think that is kind of a big difference between kind of what the actions are coming out with and kind of what this conversation's been about. Is just kind of how do we systematically and methodically kind of address the climate crisis that is here and coming for us, as Colette brought up, while still kind of meeting all these past issues. So I do think process is kind of what we're looking for, and elements and ways to kind of add layers to kind of these actions that are being thoughtful about both the past and the future, and we're trying to get. And I think too, just to add, kind of piggyback on a couple of different thoughts. I think Robbie said it first, and then Ann just said it. This infrastructure conversation is one we're having today, but it's 2025 is tomorrow in the terms of infrastructure, and so many of these investments have to start now. So even though some of these things aren't completely figured out or even partially figured out, the process things have to happen now, because the process is going to start now, and it's going to carry us through to 2020, 25, 2030, 2050. All those things are coming soon. Colleen, do we have anything else on this kind of issue? Are there anything else to kind of to wrap this conversation up and kind of move us into kind of understanding what the next few steps are going to be? Does anybody have any final?
Charles, I would just recommend that the group consider developing a vetting process to ensure environmental justice is met, and that we're addressing inequities. And like I said, there are two volunteer teams within the legal advisory group that put forth some ideas, and I'm sure other members of the task force have also, especially I'm sure equity, have also been working in the same. So maybe it would be good for everyone who has some equity recommendations or getting at environmental justice, maybe having a more fulsome gathering of all of those folks kind of pursuing that, to see if there's some specific ideas that we can put forward on action items.
That does sound great. Monique, it sounds like you are very active in that development. Can you be a point person for anybody who's on this call today to kind of get in touch with you and figure out who else is kind of working on that, and y'all can kind of plan something?
Sure.
Well, thank you. And I heard Camille say earlier that she's.
I'm not busy. Sure. Yeah. Let's do
oh
it.
well, I just
No. I'll take it on.
Or we can. I can receive those emails too if you want. I'm happy to also just kind of be the collector.
I think that might be best, just in case something falls through the crack. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, well then put that on my list instead. And then Camille already mentioned earlier that she's working on some solar ordinances, kind of thinking about how do you help communities receive some of these newer things and kind of help them think through some of those concerns. And she kind of was asking for collaborators. She's already working with Dr. Chambers and another group. But I think if you're interested in kind of thinking that through, please see her. And Ann was working on a similar set of ordinances, maybe for on-street charging, right? If everybody's going to have an electric vehicle one day, what do you do if you don't have a garage or a driveway, or you live in multifamily housing, and there are all these questions around that and land use. Trying to think if there were some other specific actions that maybe could get worked on today. We also heard just a lot about us, kind of centralizing some of these decisions at the state and kind of helping work through land use. And it sounds like Camille was also kind of starting that, at least, if not leading that. And so if you want to be on that team or have contributions for that effort, I think that would be really helpful too.
Yeah, I think that last comment from Camille and from Monique on process is a good one too. So we have, of course, the process of this 1-year planning process that we're all a part of, and, where all of the proposals that come in will be evaluated, as Charles mentioned, transparently and systematically against all of those fundamental objectives that have been identified in this process, and the advisory groups will be playing an important role in that. But I think there's process sort of beyond the 1 year of this plan as well, and how do we set in place those practices and processes that ensure that kind of level of evaluation on into implementation. And those might be kind of process things, Camille, to your point, that might actually get kind of documented in the plan, either as action or strategy items, or as something that's more kind of cross-cutting. And so I think that that's an important piece to continue to track with the group out of this discussion as well.
Thanks, Colleen. And I think we've got like just 1 or 2 slides just to kind of recap and kind of tell you guys what happens next in this whole process. Can you put this back up, Colleen? I am not. So yeah, so again, I think we just wanted to just kind of, if on the specific actions, we are still looking at this April 30th deadline, and then because that's going to set up the sector committees to have another good conversation in May once they can kind of see everything that relates to them, and then kind of to what Monique was talking about, this way that we evaluate is happening. We're going to get a first stab at some of that next week when we see these kind of scenario portfolios come through, and we start to try to apply this criteria to some of these actions that are coming in. We will have office hours because I think we're going to have a lot of questions and ways to kind of think through this. So the planning team will be available to the advisory groups in shortly after the surveys actually go out. And then finally, this is more for the public, I guess, just what our process is for submitting actions. We've got a template online. It's in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. We've got a Google form. If the template is overwhelming, we've got an email address that you can submit to. And we just want to really, hope we get a lot of good actions sent into us for this process. Yeah, and just too, also, we just really appreciate everybody who's on a sector committee. I know that they've been doing a ton of work on developing out those actions this past month. There's been a lot going on. If you have additional research questions as you're coming up against those actions, we do have Colleen, who's on our phone today, and Lindsay in our office are kind of helping to kind of collect some of those thoughts as well. And then finally, we do have this longer process that we're involved. We're kind of turning this corner on this graphic here, and we're looking ahead to kind of again, evaluating these actions as they come in, revising them based on feedback from advisory groups, and really getting into some of the hard conversations about trade-offs analysis, and of course involving the task force and doing this in full view of the public as we go through this. So these are kind of our next steps. We have some months left to go, but also everything's kind of moving pretty quick at the same time. So there are a few more steps, and not a ton of time to go through them. And then I think is that the last slide we have, Colleen? Yeah, so this is our last slide for today. And I just wanted to again thank this group for coming together. There's so many different cross-sector conversations that are all going to be a little bit, they're all hard. I think that if they were easier, they would not still be kind of hanging out there. And so there's 5 more of these. If you're interested in joining them or just listening in, please do that. And then I think that's all we have for this group. So I guess I will turn it over to public comment. Is there anybody on the panelist, on the participants side, that would like to make a public comment while I look on the, if you could raise your hand if you're an attendee and would like to make a public comment, and while I get on the climate email address here. So as the attendees are getting their thoughts together, I'm going to go into, well, Logan, I'll let you go first while I get myself organized. Let's see. Logan, you should be able to talk if you can unmute yourself. There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Logan Burke. I'm with the Alliance for Affordable Energy, and I'm on the Power Sector Committee. And I just want to raise an issue. A lot of what communities are talking about in terms of self-determination and more community and individually owned renewable infrastructure means that we really need to be careful that municipalities and parishes don't create overly burdensome, basically barriers against things like community solar or rooftop solar. There are plenty of ways to do this, and other states have already kind of grappled with it. But I just want to make sure that that whatever permitting or zoning these municipalities start to kind of undertake for things like community solar, don't make it impossible for communities to do it. Because that's going to be a really important tool for a lot of folks who are renters, for example, or have shaded rooftops that can't participate in rooftop solar in their home, but still want to be a part of that and have that self-determination. So just wanted to flag that, and I'm happy to work with you, Camille, on that.
Thank you, Logan. Anybody else in any other attendees have a comment they want to make? Okay, I've got one in the email that's definitely related to this group that I want to read in. This is from Jennifer Mouton, and she says she has a few comments, questions regarding the siting of new power generation and energy infrastructure. One is, would it be possible to provide incentives for property owners that allow solar panels on their property? And she's thinking could be similar to conservation easements that exist today. And then the second comment is also that I know that at one time Louisiana offered a tax rebate for homeowners who installed solar panels at their residences, but I believe it has been removed. Maybe it can be reproposed. And so that's from Jennifer Mouton with Fenstermaker. And I've got a couple. I think that's all I've got from the email for today's topic. So I guess with that, we don't need a motion to adjourn, but I do appreciate everybody being here, and we'll end a little bit or just a couple minutes early. But thank you very much for all your thoughtful participation and for being in charge of some of these actions that are hard and so necessary. So especially those who kind of volunteered to take on new work in addition to the work they're already doing. We really appreciate you too. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you at the next. See you next time.